They're called the Forgotten Heroes of Bletchley Park, an elite team of codebreakers who helped end a world war, but remained silent about their work for decades. Working in utmost secrecy, they cracked some of the toughest codes ever made, including those of Nazi Germany. Their leader was a genius mathematician named Alan Turing, but even he couldn't have done it without the help of the others. So here's the story of how a team of quiet heroes helped win a world war. It all began in the 1930s when an international crisis loomed. Adolf Hitler had risen to power in Germany and was rapidly rearming. He wanted to start a war, but there was one problem. If you want to wage war, you need to be able to communicate with your troops. And if you communicate, you run the risk of being intercepted. Now, the British knew that the Germans were encrypting their messages using a device called the Enigma machine. This machine scrambled any message typed into it so that it became a string of meaningless letters. And every day, German leaders used the Enigma to send messages to their generals around the world. They discussed troop movements, attack plans, everything needed to win the war. Enigma was like a typewriter, except instead of printing out readable letters, it printed out random ones. That's because it had a keyboard. But instead of 26 letters, it had 85. Each letter was represented by a different combination of electrical signals, and these signals changed constantly. For example, if I type an E, it might produce a signal like 1, 3, 17, 23, which would then translate to the letter Z. So someone receiving the message would type in 1, 3, 17, 23, and since their Enigma machine was set to Z, it would print out E. But here's where things got complicated. Every single day, Enigma's wiring was changed around. You can see the wheels here represent each letter of the alphabet. When you type in a letter, a signal is sent through this network of wires, which then prints out another letter. And every day the wiring was changed in a different way, meaning that the same letter would produce a different output and vice versa. On top of that, the wiring had 6 different settings, meaning that the same message could be encrypted 6 different ways. Every morning, the Germans would send the setting of the day along with the message so that their generals could decode it, as you can probably already guess. This made decoding these messages almost impossible. The Germans believed that their codes were unbreakable, and for the most part, they were right. That was until 1932, when a Polish mathematician named Marian Rejewski created the first Enigma-breaking machine. It was called the Bomba, and it worked by trying every possible combination until the right one was found. But this was slow and tedious and required human operators. As war loomed in Europe, the British realized they needed to do something about these codes. So they turned to the Poles for help. They gave the British a copy of the Bomba and a list of settings. But it wasn't long before the Germans noticed the Poles had been compromised, and they changed the Enigma machine. It was now even more complicated than before, generating billions of potential combinations every day. At this point, breaking the code seemed almost impossible. And I do think I have to tell you just how important it would be to crack the Enigma code. This was a matter of life and death. If the British could read German messages, they could track their movements, predict their actions, and ultimately shorten the war. Now we know that World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. But what if it had lasted 5 years longer? What if it had lasted 10 years longer? Millions more people would have died. Homes would have been destroyed. Economies would have crumbled. At this critical moment, the British government took over the code-breaking efforts and brought in the best minds to solve the puzzle. There was a mathematician named Alan Turing, who would become famous for building one of the earliest computers. Then there was Joan Clark, who was one of only 2 women allowed to work at the center. Then Dilly Knox, who was considered the best cryptographer in Britain. And finally, there was Max Newman, who played a crucial role in creating the Manchester Mark I, one of the first store-programmed computers. Together with hundreds of other codebreakers, they all lived in a secluded area outside of London called Bletchley Park. Here they worked around the clock to break the German codes. For months, they struggled with Enigma, trying every idea they could think of. Then suddenly, Tommy Flowers had an epiphany. He thought to himself, why not build a machine that tries the combinations for us? But building a machine that tried thousands of combinations per second wasn't easy. Not only did it need to match the speed of the Enigma, it also needed to try every possible combination. This was the dawn of the modern computer. The team of engineers spent months designing and building the machine, but in the end, they created something called the bomb. It was capable of testing thousands of Enigma settings per second and would soon allow the British to read almost every German message. But that's not to say that it was easy. Before they could decode the messages, they needed to find the daily setting. And since the settings changed every day, that meant finding a new solution every single day. How exactly did the bomb work? Well, to understand that, we'll need to learn a little bit more about cryptography. In the previous video, we learned about how to encrypt a message, but we didn't talk about how to decrypt it. You see, to decrypt a message, you need to know the exact opposite of how it was encrypted. If I gave you the number sequence 1, 3, 17, 23 and told you that it translated to E, you wouldn't be able to figure out how I encrypted it, especially since there is so many possible solutions. But if I gave you the encryption key, suddenly it becomes much easier. In this case, the key is the fact that every letter is shifted 3 places forward. Once you know that, you can easily decrypt my message. In fact, this encryption method is known as a Caesar cipher, and it's incredibly easy to break. But Enigma wasn't just a Caesar cipher. It was way more complicated. That's because it had multiple steps. First, the message was encrypted using a Caesar cipher. That way, the operator could quickly enter the message. Then it went through the Enigma machine, which encrypted it again. So to break Enigma, the British needed to reverse this process and remove the double encryption. Fortunately for them, the German operators weren't very smart. After encrypting the message with a Caesar cipher, they left it in plain sight for the next step. That gave the codebreakers a huge advantage because it meant they didn't need to worry about the first layer of encryption. All they needed to do was build a machine that reversed the Enigma's encryption. And that's exactly what they did. The bomb simulated the Enigma's wiring so that once the message was fed into it, it would instantly print out the solution. You might be wondering how the bomb knew what wiring pattern to try, and that's where the cribs came in. A crib is essentially an educated guess about a message. Since the Germans use common phrases like weather reports, the codebreakers could assume that the word weather was actually weather. Once they had a crib, the bomba could compare it to the encrypted message and determine the correct wiring pattern. If the bomba found a match, the operators could immediately begin decoding the message, and the whole process could take less than a minute. But keep in mind, this was during World War II, and electronics were nowhere near as advanced as they are today. This meant that the bomb was massive, taking up entire rooms and requiring a crew of technicians to operate it. And as you can imagine, the Germans weren't happy about the bomb. In 1942, they made Enigma even more complicated, adding another layer of encryption. But luckily, the British were able to adapt, and they created an improved version of the bomb that could handle the new encryption. By the end of the war, the bomb had helped the Allies win numerous battles and had saved countless lives. Historians estimate that it shortened the war by 2 years. But even after the war ended, no one knew about their work. The British government kept the project top secret for decades, partially because they didn't want the Soviets to know how they broke Enigma, but mostly because they didn't want to admit that they hadn't broken Enigma right away. But eventually, the truth came out and the world finally learned about the quiet heroes of Bletchley Park. If you enjoy optimistic science and tech stories, you might enjoy the series I'm working on. Each episode I try to answer one of the great what-if questions of history. Like what if the Berlin Wall had never fallen? Or what if the Soviet Union had won World War II? Thanks for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next video.